I'm a person who identifies as pro-choice, and the reason for that is because I think the reason behind getting an abortion can be varied and warranted, such as if the mother's um, health is endangered or if the pregnancy was the result of a rape. But make no mistake, just because I support someone's right to do something doesn't mean I'm not going to be critical of the poor decision making that led them to this situation. I support people having the right to drink, but I don't support them getting addicted to it or being involved in DUIs. My thoughts on this issue are much deeper than I initially considered them, and I have a lot to say. But before we start, I should mention that many times when a man offers his opinion on abortion rights, a woman will say that his opinion on this topic doesn't matter because he is male. This is only true if you disagree with them on it being legalized. If you agree with them, then your opinion is valid and one that should be heard. But I disagree strongly with the idea that just because of someone's gender, they can't have an opinion on something. I know that if the roles were reversed and a woman gave her opinion on circumcision, I would be seen as sexist if I told her that her opinion on the topic didn't matter because she doesn't have a banana. I should also mention that while it is a woman's body, she would not be pregnant without a man having been involved. I've spoken about how many feminist and modern women don't really want equality, and their stance on the abortion issue is a perfect example. Creating a human life takes a man and a woman, but somehow, by their logic, only those of the latter gender have an opinion worth listening to. During my stream, I mentioned that making the decision to terminate a life out of some perception that mine would be benefited would be something I could never get over. And this view comes from my belief that creating another life is one of the most important things a human being can do. And it's one you can do without any restrictions. You don't have to get a license or some other credentials to become a parent, just someone that has unprotected intercourse with you, and it could happen. And if it did happen for me, I can't imagine a scenario where I would be in support of terminating the pregnancy. The reason for this is because I don't believe it's my place to determine if someone lives or dies. In recent years, I've outlined a position, and it should be noted that this is just my opinion. I think if one of the two parents wants to have the kid, it should be allowed to be born. I know that the current narrative is entirely based around what a woman wants, but I think the opinions of both parents should matter, especially if one of them is willing to raise the kid by themselves. I do think that in an effort to not cause the child to be used for forcibly extracting compensation from the non involved parent, there should be some kind of contract signed that stipulates that the parent who will raise the child is fully aware of this now being their sole responsibility and to not expect anything from the other parent. The reason I outline that position is because during the years in which I actively pursued talking to women for the purpose of cultivating romantic relationships with them, I weighed the awful scenarios that could come out of getting involved with them. And one of the possibilities was that after I got one of them pregnant, she could decide to abort it and I would be powerless to do anything about it. I would just have to sit there and accept that in modern society, my rights as the father would not matter. I'm of the belief that if you truly don't want to have children, it's very easy to avoid being caught up in having them. If you're a man who doesn't want to have a child, you can wear a condom or in more extreme cases have a vasectomy. If you're a woman who doesn't want to have a child, you can use birth control pills or in more extreme cases have a hysterectomy. I was a teenager once and I remember how readily available condoms are. The only reason I don't carry them around everywhere I go is because the stagnation of a romance with a woman, all too well I know. But on the topic of condoms, I've mentioned that we have proof of couples declining to use them because either the man or woman prefers the feeling of a raw penetration. And I want you to think of how selfish this is. Because you have such a preference for doing it raw, you are willing to risk creating another human life. I've mentioned before that when I was still actively pursuing romantic relationships, where um, I've mentioned before that when I was still actively pursuing romantic relationships, there were multiple women who made it clear that they were not interested in having children. And I believe them because they had shown a lack of interest in doing this from the start. And one even had her tubes tied. And as bad as those women were for various other reasons, they're significantly not as awful as the ones who don't want children but keep getting pregnant due to their own stupidity. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but back when the dingbat with the baby was first revealed to be pregnant, I was still talking to Triple L at the time, and she shocked me with all of her defenses for this person that she had never met. And one of those defenses was to assume that this woman had trauma in her background. I called this out as stupid because having a tragic backstory doesn't force you to have children. And it was part of a trend I've noticed where people pretend accidental pregnancies can't be stopped. Like, in the case of rape, I don't blame the woman at all, and that's one of the reasons I support the Roe v. Wade ruling. But they talk about accidental pregnancies like a tornado hitting someone's house. These are human made incidents, which means they can be prevented. You don't have to create children you don't want. I even told Triple L that if young people just make mistakes, why don't I have a kid I can't afford as well, since this is just what we do? And she just couldn't bring herself to admit this was wrong, saying that she didn't believe in judging people who are struggling through their lives, all the while being critical of me for not continuing to go to college after I couldn't afford it. That brought me to this conclusion. Women are to blame for nothing. Anytime they do something that could be considered wrong, it's the fault of some external factor like a tragic backstory or their socioeconomic status. And that goes back to the elephant in the room. You have women, and I'm not saying it's all of them, who use abortions as a form of birth control, meaning that they can get pregnant by accident over and over again and then just keep aborting the pregnancy. Now, I saw a statistic that claimed this is not a majority of women who have abortions. And while I've never been one to question statistics, the inference I draw from this data is that the women were asked if they've had multiple abortions. Does anyone believe a woman would admit to terminating unborn lives repeatedly instead of just getting birth control pills or having her tubes tied? How did they get this data? You have people who say that birth control is not 100% effective, and I've even found an article from prochoice.org that reads, considering that most women are fertile for over 30 years and that birth control is not perfect, the likelihood of having one or two unintended pregnancies is very high. Well, here's how you can never have unintended pregnancies. Don't have sex. I know that sounds like sacrilege to some people, but allow me to offer my unwanted male opinion. I have not had sex in over 5 years, and am well acquainted with men who have gone similar stretches of time without it. So it is clearly something a person can live without. Not to mention that there are multiple ways for a man or woman to get sexual arousal without intercourse, the most prominent of which being masturbation. So I just really don't have sympathy for people who pretend not having sex or having it while equipped with birth control measures is some hard, difficult thing. I guess women's lack of care for creating a life when they decide to have intercourse makes sense when you consider it's the American way to care very little for your fellow man. That's why we bomb countries and kill thousands of people without blinking an eye. That's why we have mass shooters who will murder people that have done nothing to them and whom they've never even met before. That's why we tell people online that we've never met before to go kill themselves if they make a video we don't agree with. It is in human nature to act in a manner of self-preservation, to put our needs above others. But it gets to a point of absurdity when we choose to risk creating another life, and then when that life's creation inconveniences us, we just throw it away. We've shown that since we don't care about those who are alive, as proven when we bomb or shoot them, it should extend to the unborn as well. I'm not someone who really dabbles into poetry all that often, although I do like to rhyme, but I can't help but notice a great irony. I am a man who wanted to have children with the woman I was married to and was allowed to do neither of these things because I couldn't find a single woman who would do these things with me. By contrast, women who tend to have multiple sex partners can have children whenever they want with whoever they want and choose to get rid of them when they end up getting pregnant. So the person who wants to have children can't have them, but the people who don't want them can have them. And not only can they have them and get rid of them, they can do this as many times as they want. What I find most disturbing is when I contrast the way people act toward women who have abortions and their demeanor toward me. When a woman has an abortion and chooses not to make it public, which she has the right to do, oftentimes no one mentions it with any recurrence, and she is allowed to continue to have unprotected intercourse with men that she does not want to have children with. But when I simply express my distaste for the romantic decisions of the modern woman, only are there these calls for me to own up to something. One of the most infamous comments was from a clown who wrote, You talk about blaming others and accountability, but do you accept that you are at fault for your failure to get women? You seem to blame everything and everyone except yourself for your lack of a relationship. For the sake of playing devil's advocate, let's pretend this is true. I am a man who is not accountable for his failure to get women. Who has died because of that failure? When I refuse to take accountability for not getting women, does a child have its life terminated? Me making videos about this topic has and always will be infinitely less consequential than women creating children they either don't want or can't afford with men they are not married to. I sat here for a few days and thought about some of the various nasty things that have been written of me just because I don't want to pursue romantic relationships with women out of a disdain for getting the same undesirable results over and over again. I remember when Triple L wrote that I was edging toward extremism. So a guy who looks at a pattern and decides to stop doing something because it's not improving is edging toward extremism. But loads of women who terminate pregnancies every year at an increased rate are not edging toward extremism. I had a user about a year ago who gave me some unsolicited romantic advice while he was analyzing my body in a true demonstration of what straight men do. And when I turned down his push to get me to exercise, he wrote, "Why be content with being mediocre?" Besides the fact that his physical appearance was likely so grotesque that he had to hide it behind a football player's picture, I find it comical that I'm a mediocre man for not being able to get a woman to be romantically interested in me, which kills no one, but a woman who is so short-sighted as to become impregnated with a child she doesn't want is not a mediocre woman. And a sad part about a lot of the romance commentary is that I'm the kind of person who first started discussing this both to vent and to begin a reasonable dialogue. And I understood that in the course of having that discussion, there would be disagreements. But instead of people explaining to me why they don't agree with something, I, for the most part, am subject to these character evaluations. Edging toward extremism, mediocre man. These are not comments you make when you disagree with someone and want to explain your opposition. You make these comments when you can't address the specifics of another person's position and instead try to interpret that position and by extension that person as some evildoer having something wrong with them. And this ideology gives birth to selective outrage, where they pick and choose what causes to grandstand on and which other ones to turn a blind eye to. And let's be clear, I'm not saying they should go around harassing women that they know have had abortions. But what I am saying is that it is very bizarre to invest such animosity or negative analysis towards a person who criticizes women as if my words are more harmful than them terminating lives. But we all know the real reason for this disparity. In the feminist era, it's a lot easier to type nasty stuff to another man because you don't like him and what he's saying than it is to confront a woman on pretty much anything. You have people who, if they hear me say that I don't believe I will ever meet a woman who likes me for who I am based off my experiences with them, will criticize me as being negative, and yet they don't criticize women who don't want to carry a pregnancy to its conclusion out of a belief that the child will impact their life in some bad manner as being negative. And it's always this projection that I find so obnoxious. While I don't believe I could properly take care of a child by myself in my current state, I am fairly optimistic when you consider the external factors. This includes me not knowing if the mother works, if she has relatives who can give free daycare. There are a lot of things we don't know for sure at this point, which is why I believe that if I ever got a woman pregnant by accident but then married her and got some job that wasn't trying to fire me every other week along with her working as well, it could work. But remember, I'm the negative one. In the past, I've admitted that being single and getting rejected over and over feels like a curse, especially when it's by women who talk to you for weeks or months and waste your time. But I would rather be who I am than emulate them. If I had the choice between never going on a date with a woman ever again or being the baby daddy to some woman that I wasn't married to, I would pick the former because creating lives and thereby having children is something that I take seriously. It's something that I think needs to be done correctly. And if you can't do it that way, then you might as well not do it at all. This is where someone will say, but if you believe that, then you shouldn't criticize women who have abortions because they don't think they're ready to take care of a kid. The difference between me and them is that because of my belief system, I do not participate in things that would cause this undesirable circumstance to occur. This includes having unprotected premarital sex. By participating in this behavior, these women only adopt a view similar to mine when the damage has already been done and they have accidentally created a life that they either do not value or value as much as theirs. My outrage with this topic is fueled by two things. One, the irony of wanting to have children but never being allowed to, while women can make them whenever they want and throw them away. And two, having people online, usually men, try to insinuate that me making videos or simply not pursuing romantic relationships with women is this greatly immoral or wrong undertaking, while they are completely silent to the deaths of unborn children every year. What we have today is the byproduct of normalizing degenerate behavior. We live in an era where women get to have as many abortions as they like after getting accidentally pregnant over and over again, while so many men get rejected to the point of having whole groups of guys with the same issue. And somehow you'll see more people incensed over the rhetoric of the men on the computer than the actions of women in real life. Abortions in the US will never stop whether you legalize or ban them, but you won't see any that I approved.